Hey, church, my name is VJ. I am the lead pastor here at The Well. And one of the things I love to get you to do on Sunday is to talk in church. So here's your task. You have 2 minutes with the people around you. And if you're not close to someone, kind of move over. I promise you, this is going to be fun. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to come up with all of the different scenarios under which someone might say these words: I am declining this date. Okay, this is the sentence. I am declining this date, and you get 2 minutes to figure out as many possible scenarios of what might that sentence mean. Okay, go ahead and do that now. All right, I don't know what you came up with, but it could be, someone has asked you out on a date and you were declining that date. You don't want to go out with that person. Or the judge has fixed a date and the lawyer is saying to their client, no, I'm going to decline that date. We don't want that date. You may be saying, on such and such a date, I am going to start my decline down the stairs or escalator. Or I know the Bedouins survived on this superfood for years, but I don't like dates, so I am declining to eat this date, right? What is totally obvious in this exercise is that the context matters. And you might use those exact words in very different situations, and they would mean different things. The same is true about this sentence. Who am I? Who am I? I asked that question when I left home at 18 to go to a university 3 hours from home with 15,000 people, 15,000 students, none of whom I knew. I didn't know anyone, they didn't know me. And I realized when I got there that I could be or do anything I wanted, because there was no one from my past or my family or my friend group or whatever around. And I could literally do and really be anything I wanted. And I asked myself, who am I really? I remember asking it again years later when I became a pastor, and I had not planned on being a pastor, never thought I would do that. I remember going to a conference surrounded by other pastoral leaders who had been pastoring and leading much longer than I had. And it clearly seemed to me like they knew way more about God. They knew way more about the scriptures. They knew way more about church leadership than I did. And as I felt the insecurity welling up in me, I asked myself, who am I? Who am I to be doing this or to be in this room? And more recently and closer to the bone, a little silly wrist injury from 20-something years ago that has become a nagging injury and now a debilitating one. For someone who's played sports their whole life and worked out for 38 years, I'm asking myself, if I'm not an athlete anymore and I can't be a fit 40-something, who am I? Maybe you've asked this recently or several times through your life. There's all kinds of different contexts where we might ask this question, who am I? Maybe you're a young person, you're in high school, you're a young adult, and you're thinking, or someone keeps asking you, what are you doing next? Or what are you going to study? You have to decide where you're going to apply, if you're going to apply for college or university, and you're asking yourself, who am I going to be? Who am I going to be in life? Or maybe you've entered a new school or a new neighborhood or a new church or new job, and you're wondering, you feel the pressure to fit in, and you're sort of thinking, well, who am I going to be to them? Who am I to them? What do they want me to be? Or maybe you've been fired or recently retired from something that you did for so many hours, for so many years of your life, and you're suddenly not doing it anymore, whether by your choice or someone else's choice. And you're thinking to yourself, who am I now? If I'm not X, if I'm not a lawyer, if I'm not a business leader, if I'm not a teacher, if I'm not a this or that, who am I now? Or perhaps you're just feeling an experience in a relationship or in a friend group or in like a career of insecurity welling up in you every so often. And you're asking, like, who am I to be in this room, really? Or maybe you've just done something really dumb, really foolish, or really wrong. It's something you never thought you would do. Or you remember that season in life or that decision or that summer, and you said to yourself, who am I? Like, I never thought I was capable of this. If I can say this, I don't think it's a new question. Identity is a hot topic, but it's not a new question. It's an age-old question. And maybe, I don't know if this is comforting or not, but I think life is a series of identity crises, maybe capital I identity crises or lowercase I identity crises, as we're asking this question, who am I, throughout the seasons of our life. And the interesting thing is, even though the question is not new, the answer is different than it used to be. One of the ways that other cultures and ancient cultures and possibly even other parts of the world, even still today, would answer that question is, in order to understand who you are, who am I? Well, look around. What do the people around you tell you you are? Your family, your tribe, your nation, your country. Some families would still like it to be that way. Like, we're going to tell you what you're going to do for your career or who you're going to marry or whatever. But it was defined by the people around you, by the social pressures, by the social structures, by the familial structures and patterns and careers and whatever. They told you who you were. Your skin color told you who you were, what your family said you were going to be, the place that you were born, the tribe that you lived in, the customs around you. You conformed to that. Your identity, who am I, is answered by looking out and around you. But two major shifts happened in the last couple of hundred years that have shifted how we answer that question. One of them, and this is a gross oversimplification of the last couple hundred years of history, or certainly philosophical history, but let me just put it out in front of you. One of them is the Enlightenment movement of the 16th and 17th centuries. The key idea of the Enlightenment movement is that reason, our minds, reason is the primary way in which we know anything and make decisions, and the ultimate reality. And what the seeds of the Enlightenment started to do, and along with, the printing press and literacy rates increasing, and education and human progress being considered the primary lever towards success, there was, along with it, a deconstructing or a distrust in some of the broader institutions of government and religion and faith, and even later on in family. And so the world wars and revolutions, political revolutions, religious revolutions that came with that, saying, hey, we don't necessarily trust the externals anymore. Reason, one own self. You are free to determine who you are and who you're going to be. And in fact, you need to, because you can't trust the people and the systems around you. They have failed you. And along with that, and right underneath that, in some of the key Enlightenment thinkers, René Descartes, the French philosopher, who asked this question, how do I know anything is real? And his answer, whether or not you've read Descartes before, might be familiar to you. He came up with this: I think, therefore I am. If I can say this, it was the psychologizing of reality. In other words, how do I know anything's real? It's what my mind imagines and thinks is real. And therefore, the only thing that not only can I trust is myself, but my own thoughts. What I think I am, I am. And what I believe I can and do and want to do, that's what I can trust. That is what reality is. And that has shifted the way we answer the question, who am I, away from the outside, the externals, towards the self, and also even in particular, the mind. That the inside of me determines who I am. And therefore, this quest, or the question that we might ask at many seasons of life, who am I? The answer now is, well, who do you think you are? And it's up to you. And nobody can tell you. Nobody can tell you what to do or how to think about that. That's up to you. But it's all on you as well. And while in Christian spirituality, we absolutely affirm the value and beauty of the individual, as we're going to see today. Can I just submit to you that we were not made to bear the crushing weight of having to figure out for ourselves and by ourselves these gigantic questions of who am I? And I would suggest that our epidemic levels of loneliness, anxiety, depression, and even suicide are telling us this is too much for us to carry. Thankfully, when we find ourselves in these places of capital I or small I identity crises, we also find God is here. This has kind of been the premise over these last few weeks in this sermon series that myself and Sawyer Bullock from Bayview Glen have been walking us through here at the Well, to say, hey, there are many times in life where you will arrive at an unexpected place. And not just an unexpected place, maybe an undesirable place. A place, a situation, a season you never thought you'd be in. And in that season, when you are possibly asking with a capital I or a lowercase I, who am I, identity crisis, to realize I am here in this place of crisis asking this question, but God is here as well. And the guidebook that we've been using is the book of the Psalms, which is in the middle of the library of scripture that you have in your Bible, which is kind of the prayer and songbook of the people of God. A lot of poetry, musing, verses, and things that were written by individuals, but really actually for a community to rehearse, to pray, and to sing. And we're going to look at a psalm today that I think is one of the most helpful, profound, beautiful, significant psalms about identity and given to those who maybe are asking this question, who am I? It's written by Israel's greatest king, King David. But what's interesting about this is they don't actually know when he wrote it in his life, but we do know a lot about his life just from some of the other history books in the Old Testament. And here's what's fascinating about the life of David. He never used this. Actually, he did use the language, who am I, once. But we can look at his life and think, man, he must have had several identity crises. Like actually the beginning of his life, or the beginning when we find out about his life is, he's one of, I think, 7 or 8 sons. And they're trying to find a king for Israel. And so the prophet Samuel goes to his house, to this guy Jesse. God says, go to the house of Jesse. He's a Benjamite. And he has kids, sons, and ask him to his sons, and I'll tell you which one of the sons is going to be king. Well, when Jesse parades his sons out in front of them, he puts 7 sons in front of them, but none of them are David. And David's one of his sons. He forgot David. David was a shepherd caring for the family's flock, which is kind of a dangerous bottom of the rung job. And so he was kind of considered not that important, not significant from an identity standpoint. Wasn't even included, didn't cross his father's mind to think, oh, this is my son, when he was going to be anointed king. Well, actually, he does get anointed king. And he probably had one of those moments of going, who am I? In fact, he said, who am I and who is my family that God would bless me like this? Like, I feel way too small for this role. At one point, he comes to help in a battle to fight against this giant Goliath, David and Goliath's story. But when he arrives on the scene, he's not even a warrior. He's just there to bring food for his brothers. He's the lunch guy. He's the mule. And his brothers, and he's like, hey, someone should stand up to this guy. And his brother's like, who are you? You're not even a warrior. What are you doing here? Get out of here, right? It's a little bit like, who are you? Like insecurity and rejection. And then as he is going to become king, the current king is very jealous of him and accusing him of wrongdoing and asking him questioning his motives and who he is at the core of his being. Then, of course, he becomes king and has to make all of these decisions. And so we don't actually know when David wrote this psalm about identity, but it would have applied to him as he asked that question, who am I, in many different seasons of his life. And I want to read it for you because I think not only is it a beautiful piece of poetry or song or kind of prayer mashup, it is so helpful for us in whatever season you might be in, or as you walk with people, as they wrestle, as we wrestle together with the questions, human beings, who am I? And so I'm going to read here from Psalm 139. I'm going to read the whole thing. O Lord, you have examined my heart, and you know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts, even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say, even before I say it, Lord. You go before me, and you follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night, but even in darkness I cannot hide from you. To you the night shines as bright as day. Darkness and light are the same to you. You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand, and when I wake up, you are still with me. O God, if only you would destroy the wicked. Get out of my life, you murderers. They blaspheme you. Your enemies misuse your name. O Lord, shouldn't I hate those who hate you? Shouldn't I despise those who oppose you? Yes, I hate them with total hatred, for your enemies are my enemies. This is a little bit of an angry verse there, but then he goes to this. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life. You know, I've read this psalm for many years, several times. But what jumped out to me, leapt off the page as I was writing this message and reading this psalm, it was something I'd never seen before. And it's interesting, right? Because he is wrestling with and working through his own identity. Like, what does it mean to be me? And this is a psalm, I think, of identity. And yet, line after line, verse after verse starts with you, you, you. Not I, not me, but you. All the things he says, look, he says, you have examined my heart, Lord. You know, you see. You know everything. You go before me. You place your hand of blessing. Like, you bless. You are there. Whereas he says, like, you made, you knit, your workmanship, you watched, you saw, and you are always with me, and you lead me. Over and over, he's saying, you. Why all the yous, right? Like, this isn't some detached philosophical, theological musing that David just suddenly trips into, kind of a Bible trance or whatever, just saying some random things about God. This is so important. In his quest to understand, like, who am I? He begins not with I statements, but with you statements. And here's why. Because the first answer to the question, who am I? It's not the only answer, but it is the first one to the question, who am I? Is this, that I am someone in relationship with a living God. His first answer is that I am someone in relationship with the living God. As he's wrestling through and processing and musing about his own life, his own identity, he begins with all of these statements about who God is because he sees himself first and foremost as someone in relationship with the living God. And this is not like one component of his life or some like, oh, I'm not worthy, you're God. Like this is what I do on Sundays, or I'm a really spiritual person. This, for David, is the foundation of his life. It is the beginning point. It's the first answer. And it's actually multidimensional, right? Like even as we walk through the psalm, you realize, well, why does he start with God? Because God isn't one component of his understanding of himself or his life. God is the foundation, and God is the reality, if you will, that touches every single part of his life. And look at all the conclusions he comes to about himself in relationship to God. He says, like in verse 13 and 14, you made me beautiful, complex, and amazing. Right? He even says like, how wonderful your thoughts about me are. It's like someone saying, hey, enough about me. What do you think about me? Right? It's actually David's like, man, you made, there's like a love thing. Like you made me incredibly beautiful. He even says like your workmanship, your masterpiece, what you make, as someone once said, God don't make no junk. David's like, man, like you made me. You made me beautiful and amazing and complex. He also says in verse 15 and 16, and even at the beginning, you know me. You don't just know what I'm doing when like it says, when I'm rising or going away. It's like, you know my story. You know where I have been. You are ahead of me and behind me, like my thoughts, my actions, my life. You know everything about me. All of the days, he says, of my life were known to you before I was born. In verses 7 to 12, he says, you're always with me. Even if I was, he says, hiding, rising on the wings of the dawn, or hiding in darkness, or on the farthest depths of the oceans or the sea, even there you would be with me. He says in verse 5, you bless me, or your hand of blessing is on me. Like you have a relationship with me. The hand of the Lord is not heavy or violent towards me. It is one of blessing and comfort. Verses 5 and verses 10, he says, you support me and guide me. He says, you're ahead of me and behind me, even in the dark and hard places. Even there, you will guide me, he says. And then in verses 23 and 24, right? He says, test me and see if there's anxious ways in me or offensive ways. In other words, you calm me and you confront me, right? Like you calm the anxiety in me. See in this anxiety inside me, God, comfort me. But also see if there are offensive ways in me, things that I think or do that are not right. Confront me with those things. And then verse 24, you lead me into everlasting life. He's not talking about heaven. He's talking about a life to the full. God, this is what you do for me. See, this is the starting point for anyone on a quest to understand who they are. Who am I, David says? I start with the fact that I am in relationship with the living God who relates to me in all of these ways. This beautiful, multidimensional, multifaceted, touching every aspect of my life relationship. See, it's not wrong to think about yourself through the lens of gender or skin color or talents or abilities or job or, your money, and all of those are all important parts of our life. The problem is they are not enough to answer the question, who am I? The answer to the question is much more than your gender and your skin color and your race and your talents and your job and your friends and your status in life and whatever. None of those questions are a substantial enough answer for us to satisfy the quest, which is why we keep asking the question. Only beginning with God, that I am in relationship with a God, the living God, who relates to me like this, is enough to answer me. And actually, if you think about, what would this have done? I'm just kind of using our imagination based on what we know of David's life. What would this have done for him practically? Well, I don't know, but I wonder if in that moment where he realized all his brothers are being paraded out in front of a prophet to see who's going to become king, and he's not even included in the list, his father doesn't even remember or consider him significant enough as someone that God might use, that he says, God, you made me. You formed me. You made me a masterpiece. Someone who would have a very legitimate reason for being very insecure of his place in the family when his brothers are like, who are you? Who are you? What are you doing here? That he knows, God, you made me wonderfully, beautifully. that when he was being falsely accused by the king who he was eventually going to take over, and he knew before God he would never do anything to harm the king. He was not going to kill the king to take his next place. That's what happened in those cultures. And he was being accused of having wrong motives. He would have known, God, you know my ways. You see my hearts. You know my thoughts even before I have them. God, you see, right, that I'm innocent, right? This would have been really helpful for him when he was being accused, being someone that he wasn't. And then perhaps when he became king and he has the weight of a nation on him and he has to figure out what decisions he's going to make, where he's going to lead the country. And people are coming to him because oftentimes you played the role of judge as you were the king. People would come with their disputes and he's having to sort out the kingdom. That he would have said, okay, God, you give me wisdom. You guide me. You are in front of me and behind me. This would have been so practical to him to know that this is who God is, that God grants wisdom. And then in years when he did some terrible things, when he was caught and exposed as a murderer and adulterer, where he killed a man so that he could have that man's wife, and he was confronted with his sin, he would have said, God, test me and see the offensive ways in me. Lead me in the ways everlasting. In other words, change me. Lead me in a better way than the ways I've chosen. Man, this would have been real for him. And then when he was ultimately even rejected by so many of his people and his own son tried to murder him to take the throne from him, and he was having to hide and run, he would have said, God, see my anxiety, see my anxious thoughts, even when I'm hiding, even when I'm literally under the cover of darkness, hiding in caves, hiding from my own family or people who want to take my life, I'm never alone. Friends, these aren't just, like I said, theological, philosophical musings about God. These things are truths that at the core shape David's identity and understanding of who he was. Maybe he was asking that question, who am I now? Or who do they want me to be? Or who am I? I didn't know I was capable of such terrible things. You see what this does for us? It frees us. It frees us from having to look outside and around us to what our family expects us to be, or our friends expect us to be, or this new company that we're a part of, or the job expectations, the new school we've gone into, or what we're going to do for our career, and somehow the crushing weight of other people's expectations, it frees us. We don't have to look around us to discover who we are. It also frees us from this terrible, like too much introspection or somehow thinking that I have to figure out who I am. I have to figure out who I'm going to be. I have to figure out what I'm going to do in the rest of my life and what name I'm going to make for myself, that it's all on me and up to me. It actually frees us from the crushing weight that we were never meant to carry. Is instead of just looking out or looking in, we look up and say, wait a second. The first answer to the question, who am I? Is I am someone in relationship with the living God. And that relationship becomes the defining reality of my life. And from that relationship, I answer every other aspect of my identity. Before we talk kind of what are the practical implications of this for your life and mine, I wanted to pause. When I was looking at our worship leaders, I'll send them weeks in advance sort of what scripture passage we're going to be speaking on and where we're going with the message. And they pray and they put together songs. And one of the songs that they chose to sing today, I think is actually it's almost like a current version of this 3,000-year-old Psalm 139. It's a beautiful expression of what it means to understand ourselves in relationship to a God like this. And possibly when we're questioning ourselves or wondering about who we really are. And so they're going to sing it for you. I'd actually encourage you, whether you know it or not, just to listen at first. You can sing. I can't stop you from singing. I don't want to do that. But the words are very poetic and they're beautiful. And they give us modern words to sing our own version of this psalm today. So as you listen, listen and sing, God, what are you saying to me, about you, and where I happen to be today?
I've been strong and I've been broken within a moment. I've been faithful and I've been reckless at every bend. I've held everything together and watched it shatter. I've stood tall and I have crumbled in the same breath.
I have wrestled and I have trembled towards surrender. Chased my heart adrift and drifted home again. Blundered blessing till I've been desperate to find redemption. And every time I turn around, Lord, you're still there.
I was found before I was lost. I was yours before I was not. Grace to spare for all my mistakes, and that part just wrecks me.
And I know I don't deserve this kind of love, but somehow this kind of love is who you are. It's a grace I could never add up to be somebody you still want, but somehow you love me as you find me. Love me as you find me. Who am I to think your glory needs my praises? But if this borrowed breath is yours, Lord, take it all. You are faithful and you are gracious, and I'm just grateful to think you don't need a single thing. Still, you are mine. I was found before I was lost. I was yours before I was not. There's these scars for all my mistakes. That part just wrecks me. And I know I don't deserve this kind of love, but somehow this kind of love is who you are. It's a grace I could never add up to be somebody you still want. But somehow you love me as you find me. You love me as you find
If you want my heart, I won't second guess. I need your love more than anything. I'm yours, your love's too good to leave me here. Your love's too good to leave me here.
And I know I don't deserve this kind of love, but somehow this kind of love is who you are. It's a grace I can never add up to be somebody you still want, but somehow you love me as you find me.
I don't know where this message, this psalm, that song meets you today. I don't know every one of you in the room, and I certainly don't know your specific situations. Maybe you are coming in today and trying to figure out what the rest of your life is going to look like. You're asking that question from a career standpoint. Who am I going to be for the rest of my life? Maybe you're in a new space and you're feeling the pressure to fit in or to conform or to be somebody that other people want you to be, or how do I measure up? How do I belong? Maybe you're battling, insecurity, feelings of insecurity or weakness, or just something has dramatically changed in your life and it's making you rethink who you are at the very core of your being. Or maybe you're wrestling with some of the decisions you've made and things you've done recently and you think like, who am I? I didn't know I was capable of something so foolish or something so wrong. Or maybe someone's asking you like, who are you? What are you doing? Why did you do that? I just want to read through again some of the truths about who God is in relationship to us. And I want you to just listen and just have a sense of like, God, what are you saying to me today? Who am I? According to Psalm 139, I am in relationship with a God who made no mistake in making me, who made me as his beautiful, wonderful, complex masterpiece. A God who knows my whole story, all my thoughts, and what is going on in my life right now. A God who is always with me, no matter where I am or what I'm going through. I'm in a relationship with the God who blesses and supports me. A God who guides me in the paths and decisions that I need to make, the big ones and all the little ones. I'm in a relationship with the God who calms my anxiety. A God who confronts my sin in order to help me grow. Can I just ask for any of you where any one of those lines is what you needed to know about your identity to this God? Would you just put up your hand? Just raise it. You don't have to put it super high, but it's just like an identification of, yeah, that's where I'm at. And, we realize we're not alone. Like there are many of us who are asking this question, maybe capital I, identity crisis, or just a lowercase I. Just put up your hand. Yeah, that's me. You can put your hand down, but if you did put it up, and even if you didn't, and maybe you're walking with someone who you think is going through a crisis like this, you know what I think this whole exercise and starting with God and starting with you instead of me when I'm thinking through my identity? I think it's this, that knowing who you are starts with knowing whose you are. Knowing who you are, that you are in relationship to a God like this, and that you know whose you are, that you belong to him. Now, I know as 21st century Western people, that is a very scary thing, because we are told to distrust anyone who says you belong to them, anyone who says they have a claim of influence or authority over your life. We live as 21st century Westerners now saying, no, nobody has a claim. I am my own. I don't belong to anyone. I'm not accountable to anyone. I decide who I am, who I'm going to be, and what I'm going to do in life. And we should be suspicious of anyone who claims ownership or authority or influence over our lives. And look, we come by that suspicion and that fear honestly, right? It's a scary statement, because for so many of us, we have been failed by the people who claimed to have ownership or authority or influence over our lives, whether that's our parents or a pastor or a church or a government or anyone in authority. Like there are a lot of ways in which authority structures and people who with authority titles have failed us. We know that. That is the day we're living in. There is a reckoning happening. But what that can lead us to do is be very suspicious of a God who would say, you are mine. Where David comes to this conclusion, I belong to you, knowing whose you are. But here's why you can trust God enough to say, yes, I know whose I am, that I do belong to you. I don't live for myself and by myself. I'm not independent and autonomous from you. I actually belong to you. Here's why you can trust him. Because he needs nothing from you. He's not manipulating you. He doesn't, get this, okay? God does not need your money. He does not need your attendance at church. He does not need your worship. He does not need your obedience. He does not need your love. He was perfectly happy before any of this existed. He doesn't live off of likes, followers, fans, subscribers, money. He needs nothing from us, but he wants everything for us. He wants all of these things for us: guidance, protection, blessing, love, identity, security, peace, forgiveness, grace, in order to grow. And you might say, well, how do you know God is like that, VJ? Have you ever seen him? Well, one of the biographies of Jesus says, no one has ever seen God, but the Son, who comes from the very center of the Father, has made him known. Which is just to say this: God did not leave us up to our guesses and musings about who he might be. Even David, when he wrote this psalm, had a very thin, incomplete, distant picture of God. But God made himself fully known in the person of Jesus. And when we see Jesus coming into this world, he offered this same love, identity, security, blessing, guidance, strength, purpose, grace, healing, protection. And he demanded nothing from anyone. He said, I came not to be served by you, but to serve you and to give my life up for many. This is how we know this is who God is. And this is how we know that any quest to knowing who I am begins with knowing whose I am, that I belong to Jesus. I belong to him. And from that place, I can figure out and navigate all of the complexities of the other questions about who I am. And so here's my suggestion for you practically. If knowing who you are begins with knowing whose you are, go on a quest to know Jesus more. Go on a quest to know Jesus more. And a couple of practical ways you can do this. If you're a reader, are you a reader? You could read this book we recommend and give away often for people who are new, Who is This Man? By John Ortberg. It's a book about the incredible life of Jesus. If you're a listener, you can go back and find on our podcast or our website at thewell.ca/teaching a series I did a number of years ago called Jesus Is. It was 6 weeks just exploring all of the different aspects of who Jesus is, right? To know who you are, we want to know whose you are. And who is this Jesus? If you're an explorer, or you have friends who are exploring, you have questions. Maybe today you're like, hey, I'm not bought into any of this. I'm just figuring this out. This is great. I'm so glad you're here. We planted this church for you. But this fall at all three of our sites, we're going to be running the Alpha course, which is just an opportunity in a small group environment to discuss, to ask all of your questions and to explore and think, who is this Jesus? And what might that mean for me in my own quest to understand who I am? You know, this is not a one-time, we don't get a one-time answer and it fixes it. We haven't fixed anything today, have we? We haven't put a bow on anything. In my experience, you're going to ask these questions, this question, who am I, and many different times throughout your life. But my hope and my belief and my conviction is as that we begin with the starting point that we are in relationship with a God who gives us this sense of identity and purpose and meaning and love and beauty and inherent value and guidance and wisdom and peace on the inside and actually forgiveness for our faults and our sins and the opportunity to grow and to learn, that we become people who are more at rest with who we are, that the insecurity and the fear and the anxiety and the misplaced sense of identity begin to go away. And here's my blessing to you. As you become a person who is more secure in who you are, as you become a person who is more loved, as you become a person who is at peace because you are known by God, inside and out, as you become a person of greater wisdom as you are guided by God, as you become a person of less anxiety, as you become a person who receives grace for your sins and shortcomings, chances are there's someone else in your life who's wrestling with asking this question of identity. Who am I? Maybe God's bringing someone to your mind right now. Who else needs to know that this is who you really are. And may God give you the eyes to see who they are, the wisdom to know what to say to them, and the compassion and love to walk with them as they can discover that they also are being invited to be in a relationship with the living God.